Amazing. All right, Jeff, and I'm just gonna throw fun questions at you then. So hello everyone, and welcome to Dissecting Your Script Like a Professional. I am Nina Meehan. I am the my new title is CEO and founder of Bay Area Children's Theater, and I'm also the board president of TYA USA. And I have been coming to JTFs for like 17 years, and I'm so thrilled that even in different circumstances we can all be together. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jeff Calhoun, and I'm the CEO of Nothing. And we don't get to see anybody. Is that they only look at us? We don't get to see their faces. Oh wow. Oh well. Hi everybody. I'm going to pretend I can see you all. It's great to be here. I don't know how many years I've been coming to JTF, but I think it's well over 10. And I'm glad to be here. It's the most inspiration I garner all year, that I then take the enthusiasm from the teachers and the kids and I use it to fuel the work for that year. Hopefully there will be work this year.
Well, there's going to be work in some form because we're all here together. And so we do have a chat. So if you guys are willing to throw in the chat just who you are and where you're from, we would love to know a little bit about who is in this group. I see Dana is here from SWFL. So please let us know who you are. So today's topic, I think is really, it's really critical to be thinking about what it looks like to have a script-based process. So today we're going to divide it into 5 different parts, which I'm going to call discover, collaborate, dissect, create, and release. And within each of those parts, there's a whole series of things that the director needs to be thinking about as we go through the process of creating a show. But oh, good, people are writing in the chat, so I'm just gonna do some shout outs here. Let's see who we got. We got Ben Rush from Wesley Theater Project. I see Kentucky. I see Florida. I see Indiana, Chicago. Oh, another California. I'm in California. Jeff, where are you?
I'm in New York, but I also see Izzy here from England, and I think she was part of the Orange Pod. Hi, Izzy.
Oh my gosh. Oh, Spark of Creation. I saw it in the Blue Pod this morning. Oh, and New Zealand. Okay, so we are international. I feel really good about that. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, New Zealand. I'm not qualified.
Wait, does New Zealand have koalas, or is it only Australia?
I don't see. I just think now you're going to bust me, right? I'll hit you with my card.
Jackie, if you could let us know if New Zealand has koalas or only Australia by the end of this, it would be really terrific. All right, so no koalas in New Zealand. So as I was saying, we're looking at this idea of breaking down the script process. And so I'm going to start with this phase I'm calling discover. And this is the part where you get the script in your hand for the first time. So this is now just you, director, teacher, whatever your role is, in a room by yourself, no collaborators. Jeff, in that moment, the first time you hold that script, when you read it, what are you reading for? Like, what are you looking for? What is exciting for you at that point?
Wow, this is really fascinating, because I want everyone in the chats to understand that I didn't know anything about what this was going to be, other than it was a director's panel. And so, Nina, I love that you have this whole format thank you for doing that. This will be great to be spontaneous. These are probably questions I've never really thought about. So you're talking about, so it's not, usually with obviously a new show, I'm part of the creative process with the writers. So I'm with the script. So by the time we get the finished script, I know it inside and out, and have helped sort of navigate it towards a physical production I'm already imagining. When I get something like a revival or a script that I did not work on and it's there, I think I read it. The first thing I want to know is, does it have heart? I have to be moved, or I don't think I'm the best person to do the show. I want to do shows that have heart. And then secondly, without trying to force it or be constipated about any ideas, is there something usually with a show that I connect with, an immediate visual or a metaphor comes to mind. And that's very important to me. because that tells me I'm in sync with the show and I know what to do with the show.
Yeah. So when I similarly, I look for a couple different things. I mean, my producer part of my brain is looking at structure, cast size, style. So if I'm producing, it's a very sort of a logical world. But if I'm directing, it's the same thing, Jeff. Like, it has to speak to me. It has to move me. And for me, it comes about, like, what is the story? What is that central story we're telling? And is that central story something that I immediately have an inspiration or a vision around? So when that hits you, that inspiration vision thing, for you, is that visual? Do you do research? Is it like just like this gut reaction where you're like, this show is green? Like, what is that? What form does that take?
I think it's all those things. I think initially it's guttural and instinctual, and then usually 9 out of 10 times I get strong imagery and visuals to come with it. I need that protection. I need to feel like I understand how a show looks before I'm brave enough to really dive in, because my favorite collaboration, to be honest, besides the writers, are with the designers. And as directors, our only contribution to the writing is visual. So we write visually. We're not trying to upstage the writing. We're trying to support with our visual the text. And so I think it's those two things. It's funny that you say that about producer. The very first question any producer will ask me is, how many is in the cast? And yes. I know that's the economic realities. It's sad because I'm old enough to remember where that was not a question. They wanted, a show could be too small for them. It used to be they wanted big shows. And then once that was back in the 50s, 60s, and then 70s, and then the British invasion came. The Phantom of the Operas, the Les Mis, and that got so big the economics weren't good. And in the 80s, it went through something called the mini musical. And that's when they scaled down again. And that's when we got Day in Hollywood, Night in the Ukraine, Barnum. They called them mini musicals. And that's the first time I was aware of people asking how big the casts were.
Interesting. Yeah. And, so many people in the JTF world have to wear both those hats. Right. So many of the directors here, or choreographers, or music directors, are also simultaneously wearing that producer hat. And I've definitely done both. And so it is interesting how, that question, in the world of JTF, the cast size, bigger is better for some programs. For some programs, like if you're in a middle school and there are 90 kids who want to audition, the last thing on earth you want to do is do a show with 5 characters, right? And yet, at the same time, for some other programs, particularly in COVID times, we've had a moment where we're like, oh, I'm only allowed X number of kids in the room right now. And by the way, shout out to all of you who have been amazing innovators for the last 10 months and made this world keep moving forward for our kids. I just have to say it. I know Tim McDonald said it, but I have to say it. Shout out to all of you guys. But so that question of cast size it does come into play for that producer part of your brain. So when you're looking at with your director brain, Jeff, let's talk about like a new work. What is the discover phase of a new work for you? So you're working with a playwright and a composer. Where is your brain during that progression of process?
I think it starts with what we talked about earlier. Is the subject matter worthy? And does the subject matter have heart? And most importantly, does the topic sing? There are a lot of great stories that don't warrant music. They don't sing. But you're looking for a story that you think soars. It's a bit operatic in one aspect or another to motivate that music. And talking about cast size, last year, not this past year, but the year before last, Newsies was one of the largest licensed shows in the world because you could use everybody who wanted to be in it. And girls, boys, everybody. And so that's an example of more is more, which is great. Yes. But yes, I also want to echo the shout out. The Orange Pod, I'm sure it's true in all the pods, the creativity and the imagination that went into this with no resources, just the imagination. It was I have to say, it was almost, I want to say, my favorite JTF experience. I know we don't have that in-person thing, but something about it transcended. And I think maybe it's that we've been starved for theater since March, and this was our first time, eating after a fast.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think you could feel it in the kids too. You could feel it in their performances. And I know, the directors watching today, you guys have, to use Jeff's beautiful metaphor, like you guys have given those kids spaghetti every day. Like they needed to eat, they needed each other, they needed theater, and whatever form that ended up taking this year has been by definition magical. And so
anyway,
thrilled.
to continue, I didn't mean I tend to, which is why I'm not a CEO of anything. Not only can I not spell CEO, I tend to digress I'm not a wordsmith, I'm a visualist. But to answer your question about, once I find a show that I think sings and has heart, and you start collaborating with the writers, you find out the fun part is figuring out, where does the song come? What character sings what at what moment in the show and for what reason? And that's really fun. And that's one of my favorite parts of the process, developing a show and figuring out who sings when and why. And that goes to what you talked about earlier, structure. And you're only as good as I have no writing ability. I'm a pretty good editor, which I think most directors are, but I don't have a gift for pen to pad. So I have my hats off to writers. In my next life, I would like to have that gift. But I just love working with the writers and just figuring out the structure of the show. And when you're in it from the ground floor up, you can mold, if you have a strong sense of the visual of the show, you can actually guide the show in the direction that you want it to go to match the visual that you have in your head, as opposed to coming in afterwards. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I totally do. I do a lot of new musicals, but ours are almost all adaptations of children's books. And the ones that in my opinion, have always come out strongest are the ones where I instantly understand the connection of what is the world of the stage? What does it want to look like? What does it want to feel like when the audience is sitting there watching? What is that inside and outside experience? And those are when those things connect, I know we got a winner. And that's very, very early on. And I think that's what I love what you're saying. This is when you're talking to the writers early on. But you use this magical word collaborate, which gets us to what I'm calling our second phase here, which is this pre-production zone where, if for those of you who are lucky enough to have designers, and I understand that for many of you, designers is a relative term. That might be a mom who volunteers to get a list of props. It may be, another parent who's willing to build a platform. But some of you do have young people who are interested in costume design, or an art department in your school that's willing to build a set. And some of you work with full designers. But in that second phase, this is before rehearsals start. We start that collaborative process. We bring in the rest of the team, whatever that team is. So I'm wondering, Jeff, we hit that moment where you're not all by yourself in a room anymore. You've got other people. How do you share that vision and that heart that you see with other people? Because I feel like in some ways as directors, that's kind of our only job, right? If we can get it from our head to other people, we can make a show.
It's a good question. I think of my job as trying to make everybody the best they can be. That's what I think my role is, and that requires skills of collaboration. And I think the best idea wins. It doesn't have to come from me. Whoever the best idea wins, and I think that's really good advice. And I think when you're looking at creating, how do you take from page to stage, the most important word for me is metaphor. I encourage all the directors out there, metaphor is your friend. It may be something that the audience isn't aware of, but it is subliminal. For instance, when I got the script for Newsies, Harvey Fierstein, who is a brilliant writer and no structure great, but he is a wordsmith, right? Not a visualist, he's a wordsmith. He wrote the whole show as if it were to take place on a turntable. And I didn't understand the metaphor of there's nothing circular about the show, right? If you're doing carousel, I understand the metaphor. If you're doing, Les Mis and you need two things and you need to turn to show the barricade because it's too, I understand that. But Newsies was a vertical show. It was David and Goliath. It was New York City, skyscrapers. So it was about the boys scaling Goliath and conquering. So when I met with my set designer, I talked about it being a vertical show. And that's when Tobin, our set designer, came up with those 3 pieces of scaffolding that acted as beautiful metaphors. It was a jungle gym for the kids to play, to be kids, but it was also Goliath that they could scale, but it was also tenements in Manhattan. So it served many, many metaphors. And I wouldn't underestimate the power of the metaphor.
I love how what you're talking about here is bringing the structure of the, Carla wants you to know the set was fantastic. I agree, Carla. It was awesome. Oh, by the way, guys, I totally forgot to say this, and I should have. Please, if you have questions while we're chatting, put them in the chat. Like we want to make sure that you guys get out of this next 40 minutes or whatever what you came here for. So please, 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 if you have specific questions or anything we say, throw it in the chat. We'll be monitoring it. Okay, so what I love about what you're just talking about, Jeff, is you're actually marrying this notion of sort of structure and what's possible and kind of the like nuts and bolts of let's make a show with the metaphor of the story. And I think that there's something really fantastic about that, because we often get caught in, well, I only have 4 flats. Well, I only have whatever it is, and finding, okay, well, is this a vertical or a horizontal show? Great. If you have 4 flats and it's a vertical show, put them up that way. Like to find that place where those 2 things meet is really, really magical. And Jennifer, oh, hi, Jennifer, is asking, could Jeff please repeat what he initially said about my role as the director is...
Jennifer, I think your role as a director is to make everybody you're collaborating with the best they can be. Don't you try to be the best lighting designer. Make your lighting designer the best lighting designer they can be. And that goes for all of the characters. And Nina, sometimes people ask me, how do you arrive at a metaphor for a show? And I think the simplest way to break that down is ask yourself, how do I personify the theme of the show? And if you answer that question 9 out of 10 times, it will be a metaphor. I
love that. Say that one more time, Jeff, so everyone, because that was a beautiful.
You try to articulate, how can I personify the theme of the show? And in doing that, in that personification of the theme, a metaphor 9 out of 10 times will emerge. Like, for instance, Bonnie and Clyde was the opposite of Newsies. Bonnie and Clyde was a Texas landscape. But I didn't want a flat floor because I wanted the floor to be as dangerous and precarious as the times they were living in and the story we were telling. And that's why the stage was all different levels, because it was dangerous for the actors to get around. So all those kind of hidden metaphors, I think, are your friend. And again, the audience will not know it, but it will aid in why they enjoyed the show without them even knowing it. It's like when you cook something, the people that taste your food aren't going to know all the herbs and spices you used, but that doesn't matter. The end result will be fulfilling.
And, Jeff, for the folks who are listening today, they're really, we all direct a lot of these junior scripts, and all of them have these same metaphors that Jeff is talking about. And it's all there. And even with limited resources, if you ground in the metaphor, it allows you to take your limited resources and know how to use them best, which I think is actually sometimes that's the hardest thing when you have limited resources. It's so easy to get into a mindset of scarcity, like, oh, I only have this. But if you ground in that metaphor, it's, oh, well, I have this to tell this story and bring to life this metaphor.
Yeah, I've been better with the less resources I've had. I found the more imaginative I have been. And that's what I'm garnering from today's adjudication of the Orange Pod. They had no props, no scenery. it forced them to activate their imagination, which activated mine. There were several instances where I was more moved today than I was when I saw the show originally on Broadway with all millions of dollars, you know? Yeah.
Amazing. I totally hear that.
By
Yeah.
the way, this is iced tea. I don't want to get any grief from Tim. It's iced tea.
So in the collaborate phase, I'm just going to kind of summarize what my process is, and a lot of this is a lot of what Jeff has been talking about. So for me, it's about creating a safe space for a team to express their thoughts and ideas, which I think goes along with exactly what Jeff is talking about. Let the lighting designer be the best lighting designer. That's not your job as the director, it's their job. And if you don't have a lighting designer, who can you empower to give the box of Christmas lights to and say, what can you do to help me tell this story best? Let's do this together. Because, you know, it can be Christmas lights. And we all have a box of them. I mean, I don't celebrate Christmas, but I still have a box of Christmas lights. So, and then the other part of this is that dream together and really solidify that shared vision, or in what Jeff is saying, it's shared that metaphor, making sure we're all telling that same story. And then this last one, and Jeff, this is where I'm putting the producer hat on, is there is a part of this collaborate phase where we have to plan for what is needed to execute the vision in rehearsal. You know, if you are trying to do a show with a turntable and you are trying to rehearse that show, and you know you're only going to have that turntable for half a day of tech, you need to stage that differently than if you're going to have that turntable for 3 weeks. So there is this sort of practical part of the collaboration phase where it's like, okay, I as director, I need 4 rehearsal cubes. Can we make that happen? Sounds like set designer, you're going to give me scaffolding. Can I get some ladders in my rehearsal room so that I can see what levels look like? Jeff, for you, is that practical phase something that you're a part of, or is that usually something that your producers or stage managers are working on?
I've been doing this since I was a chorus boy, and I know every aspect of it. And I had a great teacher, a gentleman named Tommy Toon, and he always said to me, I know we were doing a show called The Will Rogers Follies, and my job was to choreograph that show. And it was a new musical. And I would come to Tommy and I would say, I have a couple ideas for this solution. And he'd say, only give me the best one. And I'd be like, no, but I have a couple. He goes, I just want to hear the best one. And then what he expected me to do was not only give him what was the most imaginative, but he taught me, don't give me an idea that's going to add an extra flyman to the crew. Don't give me an idea that's going to cost the producer more money. He was adamant about, he also was a bit of a control, you know, he, like most directors, he liked control. So he didn't want to.
Wait. We like control? I don't know.
He hated to sit in tech where he wasn't in control, where he had to wait for someone else's to, you know, for some technology to take over, which is why Tommy Toon's shows are so imaginative, because he didn't rely heavily on technique like all the pods I saw today. He relied on imagination. But he really taught me that, to be very economically aware and use my imagination, not my checkbook.
Nice. I love that. Kimberly and Carla, we see you. We all have that moment where it's like, I'm the director, I'm going to hold on tight. But I love the moment when you can just say, let's let our imagination
And Nina,
soar.
you said something that I think was really important about creating an atmosphere where everyone feels safe. I'm old enough to remember times when, and it's not, thank God, like this anymore, people tried to get results through intimidation and fear. This is back in the Michael Bennett days and the Tommy Walsh days, and it's not like that anymore. I believe you're going to get more by nurturing a loving environment where people aren't afraid to fail. You know, then everyone's going to speak up and you're going to have more ideas in order to find that best idea that I talked about earlier. So it's very important to create a loving, nurturing atmosphere where people feel safe.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about the importance of giving people space to fail.
Absolutely, because it's creativity. There's no right or wrong. It's all subjective. There are no wrong ideas, right? It's just a level of taste. Yeah.
in my company, we talk about beautiful oops, the power of the beautiful oops, because it can change
I
the
love
world.
that. Beautiful oops. I call it happy accidents, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, same idea, exactly. So the next phase we're going to move into is what I'm calling dissect, and this is table work, scene work, character work. We're in the room, we have our actors, we've got our script, and now it's time to really kind of dig in. So, Jeff, what is that for you? Do you do table work? Do you do scene work? Like, what is your process
You
for
know
that?
what? I'm probably the worst person to address this question. Um, I, you know, I feel like I feel like the writers have done that work, and if you've done your job at casting correctly, the actor then adds to that. And so I find that anything I say will limit and put a ceiling on the creativity. So in other words, when an actor asks me what I want, I tend to say, I want you to do something better than I could articulate. Now I'm there to save you and to help you, save you from yourself and to navigate when I need to. But I tend to not do a lot of that. And I know a lot of directors think that that's maybe outside in, but I disagree. I think it's letting again, it's making the actor the best actor they can be. I don't want to limit their choices with my choice. And I got that by watching Robert Altman get his Lifetime Oscar Award. And he told that story about an actor asking him what they want. And it was Robert Altman that said, I want something better than I could tell you. And I adhere to that. So that might not be the right answer, but that's my process.
But I love that answer. I mean, so what you're saying is that for you, that dissect process is really about giving it to the actors, and in this case, for many of our people, our folks here, to the students, and empowering them to find the character, to find the language that is going to best tell the story. And I see some really beautiful comments here in the chat. Dana's saying that she's always in awe of how the kids rise to the occasion when you empower them, believe in them, and challenge them. And there
Carla,
was another
Carla.
comment here. Yes. Oh, Carla, yes, 100% theater needs to be a safe space. And somebody, I was trying very hard to make my entire show student run. I help them so that by the time it's showtime, it's their show and they are doing it all. Yes, I think that is so critical. And I love that the idea of this sort of dissect phase, which, yes, traditionally, like, you are taught, you sit in a room, you read a script. And I will fully admit, Jeff, I don't do table reads like that either in my rehearsal room. I just put it here because I thought that was the thing I was supposed to put here, because that's what we're taught to do. But I love getting up and playing and finding it from the heart. And in the same way that, like, what spoke to me, what is speaking to my actors. That's what what the table read process is
also,
about.
I'm sure there's a time and a place if you're doing a play or a new play or a play with incredible depth and nuance. But in the musical theater world, we're pretty clear about what the intention of a scene is leading into a song. And there are only a finite amount of emotions. And we are the final arbiters of directors. So we can let people play until you feel like you need to be a traffic cop and stop people from the west and wave on people from the east. You'll have that time. But until then, let everyone contribute. They'll also feel empowered. They'll feel like they have more skin in the game if you do that. And that always makes for a stronger, tighter cast.
Yeah, I love the vision of director as traffic cop. I think there is so much truth to that, particularly in the world of musical theater. Lexi is saying that one of the most important jobs of the director is to cast the show with the best actors you can that service the show. And Lexi, I just want to say, I did not put the casting process in this outline today because I was focusing on the script, but you're 100% right that in the end, casting is like 97.9% of our jobs. And if you can get that part right and find the way to elevate each student by putting them in a place where they are at the ceiling of their challenge zone, that is the most powerful thing you can possibly do.
No, there's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. Casting is, as you said, a huge lion's share of our job. And I've been fortunate enough to be in the room when the right people walked in that were perfect, you know, for the role. I mean, Newsies, I think a large part of that goes to Jeremy Jordan. Innately is Jack Kelly. He is that modern day Marlon Brando or James Dean, and you can't act that. That is who he is. You know, same with Bonnie and Clyde. He was Clyde. I mean, he has that danger but vulnerable. And casting is just, you know, I felt that I was lucky enough to have Sutton Foster walk into the room when she was 17 years old in Detroit, auditioning for the tour of the Will Rogers Follies. And it was just, it was so obvious that a star had walked into the room. She, you know what I mean? And so when it was time to cast Grease, she was like the perfect Sandy. So casting is I don't mean to digress again. Sorry, I digress. Casting is everything, and it makes you look good, you know?
Yeah, no, that I love that. It does it. If we do that job right, it makes us look like we're total geniuses, and really we didn't do anything. We just put the right person in the right place and said, go. Right. Which brings us to our next phase. Here we go, Sam. It's a 5-step process here, Jeff. We're on 4. This is what I'm calling the create phase. So we've already been talking about this a lot, but really we've, you know, done sort of the process of giving the actors the time to find that character. We're in a room together. This is where we get to that place where we need to kind of, you know, what I would say is you sort of turn it from like cupcake batter into the cupcake. And, you know, we're not in tech yet, so we don't have the frosting yet, but like it really has to start to come together. And for me, the most important part of that process is still allowing the play in the room, but playing together in the same direction. So where the early rehearsal process, we can be on a playground and the kids are all over the place. You know, this is like recess and the 2nd grade playground. Whereas by the time we get to this next phase, this create phase, I want to make sure that everybody's playing the same game. We're just all still laughing and having fun. So I'm wondering, Jeff, for you, maybe you have a specific story about this or in general, what is a moment in a rehearsal process that you've been part of when you just felt that spark of like, oh, we're cooking now. We're here. We got a show. Like, we're all, the winds are all pushing us in the same direction. Do you have like a moment you can think of that in a rehearsal process like that?
I'm sure I do. You talk about, you know, calling this the creative section, but ironically for me, by the time you actually get into that rehearsal room, the show is basically staged in my mind because I know how a scene has to begin and end just because of the physical production, what the set move is going to be. So it's filling in from the beginning to the end. That's really the fun part that I haven't thought, because if you've done your homework, you can trust you'll figure that out in rehearsal. But whether you're successful or not is about the ground plan. And that was done months ago. And the casting, which was also done months ago. So by the time you start rehearsals, a lot of the work is done. But specifically to your question, I remember I was doing a revival of Big River with the Deaf West Theater. And half of the cast was deaf and the other half was hearing. So all the deaf actors had to learn how to follow the music they couldn't hear. And the hearing actors had to learn how to do ASL at the same times that they did their dialogue. So we're in tech at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles. And the lighting designer, Michael Gilliam, is taking an inordinate amount of time to light this scene. I mean, it feels like forever from a director's point of view. And so Stephen Landau, our musical director, said, I'll take advantage of this time to rehearse. I'm waiting for the lights to shine. I'm waiting for the light to shine. Okay, so I'm sitting in the theater having coffee and just sort of watching. And this is a good a note for directors. Never turn off your observation skills. Try to maintain a 360-degree perspective of the world for as long and as often as you can. So I'm sitting in the house and Steve's up there and everyone's doing, I'm waiting for the light to shine. And he wanted to work on a note. So he cut off the actors. He said, wait, stop. And all the hearing actors stopped. But the deaf actors who didn't hear him kept signing. And it was so profound to turn off the volume, but to see the visual continue, that I realized this is the whole life and world of Huck Finn, who was deaf. And so I took that happy accident, that oops moment, or oh no, what'd you call it? The
beautiful oops.
And I found a place in the show where we could do that. Now, I'm not smart enough to have thought of that, but I was aware enough to see it and realize, and it turned out to be the moment that everyone talks about who saw that production. Because you actually, it's at the height of Huck's peril that we turned off the sound, but he kept going. And everyone in the audience for that second not only felt the perilous moment of Huck at that moment, but what it must be like to be deaf and to be in his shoes. And it was the most profound moment of my career by far.
I love that. And what's so interesting about what we were talking about, going back to, we're talking about dissecting a script, going back to the text, going back to the story we're telling. In that moment, you realized how to elevate an aspect of the script that you were already exploring. And what it sounds like is that because you had built all of the structure to get there and you'd done all of the work, you were open to seeing it. Because I feel like sometimes we as directors, we get so stressed, and I know this particularly for those of you wearing 400 hats, it becomes so easy to become focused and stressed on, does the box office have the tickets? Do I have a volunteer to run my concessions? That we lose sight of being open to seeing those magical moments where it does all come together. So I think it's so important to sort of remind ourselves that, stop. What's this story about? What am I seeing in this moment? Is there something that these beautiful children can bring to this moment, or are bringing to this moment, that I haven't allowed myself to see yet, but now I do? That's very, that must have been an incredible moment. I'm like tearing up listening to you tell the story. So there is a great question here from a couple minutes back from Jen Kessler saying, do you have any tips for helping young actors who may be very new to performing help to understand that they can have options and freedom in making choices? Oh, such a great question. Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the easiest thing in the world. Why would we complicate it? Because that same person in life has all those options at her disposal every second, and she makes those decisions in life. It's no different when you're telling a story or playing a role, so it should be the same rules that apply in real life, because all we're doing is holding a mirror up to life. So the rules don't change. We shouldn't be like when actors get nervous. Well, they're not nervous in life when they walk down the street. And so because it changes who you are molecularly, it changes who you are. And that inhibits your natural God-given beauty, because that's what fear does. It stifles that. So I would just tell them to act, I wouldn't scare them. It's no different than how they act in real life and the choices and options that they have in real life.
Yeah. And I think, particularly when you're talking about kids, that's for me why going back to play as part of your rehearsal process is so critical, because they know how to play. Like, we as adults, we sometimes forget, and we have to actually take the time to remind ourselves, oh, right, this is what play looks like.
Think of the stage as a big sandbox,
Yes, there it is. Okay, so moving forward, so we've created, and now we are moving forward to the part where we release the show. We're on a stage. It's tech. The designers have everything. The stage manager's calling. So, Jeff, once we get to this place, for you, how do you make sure that you don't get overwhelmed with the tech process, and that we're still honoring that script?
I hate to say that. Could you say that another way? I don't quote. Yeah,
totally.
Say it another way.
Okay, so we've gotten to we're entering tech.
My favorite part of the process is tech, because that's where you throw the dream out the window And now it's like, oh, it's not going to look like that. Okay. And you take what is real and make that the best it can be. But
all right. So that actually, I mean, that basically answered my question actually, right? So what I was asking is like, once you're in that moment, how do you make sure that you don't lose the through line? And what I hear you saying is, for you, it's looking and being where you are and just making the best of how it is and finding the magic and the joy and the things that you weren't expecting, and how are they going to work?
Yeah, you can never lose your spontaneity by some contrived formula you thought. You thought it was best for this actor to enter down right. So you're just working hard to make that work instead of going, well, maybe that was the wrong idea. Oh, yes, she should enter from up there. I never thought of that. You need to stay open to your spontaneity. You can never stop that spontaneity. Even if in tech, it's like, oh my God, this is not how I imagined it. 9 out of 10 times, it will not be the way you imagined it, right? The harsh reality sets in, and then you have to be flexible. So I would say, and it's like cooking. It's the same as cooking. You know the ingredients, but one day it might be hotter outside, so the oven's working differently. So you have to keep being open to adjusting things slightly. Never get locked into anything that's too formal. I don't know what the right word is, but I would just say stay malleable and stay in the moment and stay flexible.
Yeah, there's in that idea of like, oh, I have to be right. I like to talk about, when we start shoulding all over the stage, SHOULD. Oh, well, this should be like this. Oh, this should be like this, as opposed to what is. How can we figure out, well, what is, and then all of that work we've already done, that's gonna inform us, and it's gonna end up 99% of the time being more exciting and better than we ever could have imagined, as you say, Jeff, like, in our own heads, because that's where all of that work comes together.
Catherine has a very interesting question. She's asking about how to focus on the journey as opposed to the end product, not worrying about making the end product perfect. And in doing so, you lose the joy of the process. I would say that's a brilliant question, because it should never be about the end result, especially at this level we're talking about. The more you make the journey enjoyable for the kids, the more that will be reflected in the final product. The time I did a show thinking about the final product, oh, this is going to be good, this is going to win me a Tony, or this is going to make a lot of money, or those are the times the shows never work. When I did it because I loved the show, and it was really about enjoying the process of figuring it out and not knowing the end, 9 out of 10 times, those were the shows that were most successful. So yes, it's always instill in the kid, it's about the journey. The result will be what it is. You work just as hard on a flop as you do on a hit. So why not have a great journey for everyone involved?
And it's not like you ever plan on the flop.
That's right.
Right? Like I never walk into a process being like, this one is going to be a disaster at the box office. Okay, everybody, let's go. I mean, you just don't do that. That's not the part that we're in control of. So I love what you're talking about just being in the moment and making sure that it is about the journey and not about the end. And I think particularly when we're working with young people, because young people will feel that stress. If you've put in your head this picture of, I have to make a good show, the young people are going to feel that, and then they're going to start to put that stress on themselves